Salute. I'd like to welcome everyone who took the time to join us today. Is there any desire on part of any of the members of the committee to modify the agenda? Staff? Okay, seeing none, we'll move forward as presented. This would be the opportunity for the public to comment on any non-agenda items. So if you'd like to make a comment or advise the committee on an item not currently on the agenda, please come forward. Seeing none, we'll move on to the discussion items. First of all is the approval of the 9/12/2019 agenda or action summary, minutes or action summary. Any corrections or comments? We would then entertain a motion for approval. We have a motion to approve this action summary. Is there a second?
I second.
A second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, County Administrative Office updates.
Yes, thank you, and good afternoon, Chair Zemer and members of the committee. We do have a few updates from this past week and just some other items that have come up with the County Administrative Office. Again, my name is Neftali Rubio-Mills. I'm the Senior Administrative Analyst with the County Administrative Office. Is that better? Okay. And so first I just wanted to mention that we did take all MOUs to the board, and all of them were approved in their, final format by them in November. And so that piece is all set. And then just a reminder of the staffing transitions we have coming up. I will be going on maternity leave early January. And as you can see, Alicia has taken a step back and will hope to, I think, remain a little less hands-on, but of course is there as a support person. And Fiona Wilson will be transitioning to your main point of contact going forward. We will have another support staff, Vanessa Erickson, who I believe, I don't know if this committee specifically has worked with her, but she will be kind of filling in as more of a clerical, like admin support role. So she might come in at some point in the meeting so we can introduce you. So those are just sort of housekeeping things to let you know. And then the last bit of business from our office is that we took first quarter before the board just this Tuesday. And we did have just over $400,000, I think it was $430,000 in the Measure Z fund. And the board did elect to distribute that to roads. So that happened on Tuesday. So I just wanted to give you a heads up about that as well. So that's all of the updates from our office. Did you have questions about any of those?
Next item would be consideration and potential approval of a carry forward policy.
Yes, so you have copies of that carry forward policy in your packets, but I'll bring it up here. The intention of the policy, we've in the past allowed carry forward and imagine we will continue to do so, but it's been managed more on a case-by-case basis. The intent of the policy is to provide just an equitable way of approaching these requests and just to provide some consistency and a policy to back that consistency up. So we came up with this policy that we felt was pretty fair. We asked that the applicants, I assume that you've been able to read it, but that the applicants come before the close of the budget cycle, that the request be to carry forward $5,000 equal to $5,000 or more, so anything below that would not be eligible for carry forward, and that the need for carry forward still fits within the scope of the original application. We hope to bring this to the board with first quarter, but wanted to make sure you guys had a chance to see it and give feedback first. So that's this opportunity here. So if you have any questions or feedback from me, we can make active changes. So I'll hand it over to you for that.
Question about just language use. In the Section A criteria or approval in paragraph 2, I think I understand the intent, but I wonder if the language follows the intent. It says, approval for carry forward shall be granted by the county administrative officer or designee. Wouldn't the preferable language be may be approved, or shall as a directive? And it would seem to imply that there is no alternative but to approve the request, and I don't think that's our intent. So my suggestion would be we substitute the word shall with may or some other permissive nomenclature.
Sure, I think let me, if that's preferable to you, I think we can do that as well. Any others?
Any other comments or questions? Would there be a potential motion then to approve the carry forward procedure with a modification noted here?
So moved.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Rich seconds. Any discussion? Public comment on this particular topic?
Good afternoon, Tom Madsen, Director of Public Works for the county. I have a simple comment on item B1, the minimum amount to carry forward. I recommend that you consider the possibility of a funding amount that kicks that in. Many of our smaller grants may need 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 that needs to be carried forward, like our Willow Creek group that get very small grants, and that 1, 2, 3, 4,000 may be very critical for them to complete their projects. So to consider something like if you got an award over 50,000, maybe the limit's 5,000. But for some of those smaller groups, if they have a very valid reason for moving that money forward and it's under 5,000, that could be problematic. Thank you.
Okay. Staff, could you address where the $5,000 limitation is? It a operational consideration, or where did it come from?
Sure, it is, but also it seems that the trend of that we've noticed where the smaller amounts are being asked for, it's simply that the work just hasn't been done, and so we're carrying forward $1,000 or less year after year, and it just seems to be more of an administrative thing where it doesn't seem like there's any large barriers to taking action and spending those funds down in the initial year that we've observed so far. Although we do recognize that could be an issue going forward. I don't think that we would be opposed to adding some language, if it's not already in there, relating to like a case-by-case evaluation for extenuating circumstances or something like that. But it doesn't seem that has been an issue typically in the past.
Okay.
So I think that's why it didn't come up for us.
In your mind, does this policy allow serial carry forwards? In other words, can I submit a carry forward request sequentially year after year and have it be considered, or is this a one-time situation?
I think it does allow for the sequential carry forward should the need still qualify under the rest of the policy. Would you agree that?
I would agree that it does allow for a sequential carry forward, and a great example of that is the building projects with the Fire Chiefs Association. That's been carried forward for 3 years now, and the opinion of our office would be that there is certainly the need to do so because those projects are lengthy in nature and require an immense amount of initial engineering and planning work, then permitting, and then construction, which takes place in multiple stages. So. But as Ms. Rubio Mills pointed out, it would be evaluated per this policy to ensure that it meets the spirit of the application and falls within the guidelines set out in this policy.
Okay. Have there been any or a significant number of requests that would not have met the $5,000 threshold?
There's been one request in particular, as pointed out by Mr. Madsen. The Willow Creek group carried forward an initial request of, I believe it was like around $2,700. And then they did wish to request a carry forward this year of, they had made a request of like $700, and we told them that it wasn't, prudent to continue to carry forward such a small balance. So that has also played into this decision here to include a minimum balance. And I would encourage to stick to that minimum balance because it is a lengthy process, and we do hear from a lot of the applicants that are these smaller dollar amounts that they find it cumbersome to go through contracting to provide documentation of their insurance, and regardless of the amount of the contract, that would still be a requirement. So my suggestion would be if we put a smaller limit, like applications less than 50,000 or 10,000, that we reduce that limit to maybe $1,000. So that we don't continue to have each year small applicants carrying forward minimal dollar amounts. Instead, we would encourage them to make the efforts to spend those dollars in that current fiscal year.
Okay, thank you. Pleasure of the committee.
I appreciate Director Mattson's comments. I made the motion. I moved approval with Chair Ziemer's recommended change. I'm kind of reluctant to withdraw the motion and make a new one because number 2, those people with the fewer amounts still have an opportunity at the public hearing process, but I'm willing to consider any recommendations from other committee members.
I would like to go with Director Mattson's recommendation of a threshold of 50,000. Below that, the limit is $1,000. I think that provides clear direction to applicants and staff on how to deal with that.
Would you like to make that in the form of an amendment to the motion, or how are you?
I'll withdraw my motion so he can make that motion.
Okay. Let me think about my Roberts here a little bit.
May I add to the discussion?
Certainly.
In talking about this in dollar forms, we're working with applications that have a variety of requests. So there's some applications that are looking at, $500,000 application. There's some applications that are like $50,000. So I'm wondering if putting a more of a percentage-based view on what the floor and ceiling is of the application is more realistic for an individual base as opposed to a defined dollar amount. And I'm wondering if that's something that we would want to explore.
What's staff's view on that option?
I think the percentage amount, while a great idea, does leave a lot of room for disparity. We have an application this year that is $2,100. So let's say you did 10% or something of that sort, then that would be $210 that we would be carrying forward. And so it becomes an ineffective use of, there's a lot of time and bureaucratics that go into these allocations, as well as going through the contract process, bringing them back to the board. And so, it becomes a point where, you might not be spending taxpayer dollars most effectively because you would cost more in staff time to initiate that change than you would actually reap and benefit by carrying forward those dollars. Likewise, the fire chiefs are, tend to be upwards of $2 million. So you set, you reach a high threshold with them, which we're not talking about a top end of that, but, particularly for those small ones, depending on what percentage you were to choose, you start to get down into some pretty small dollar amounts.
Okay. Procedurally, the maker of the original motion would like to withdraw their motion. Does the seconder concur with the withdrawal of the motion?
A second.
Okay. So we'll consider Laura's motion struck from the table. Mr. Robertson, would you like to make a motion that has the more complex setting?
I would make a motion to add language to the policy section 3B1 to have a threshold that anything below the application threshold of 50,000 The carry forward request must be made in a dollar amount equal to or greater than $1,000.
Okay, so this is an addition to the existing language.
Yep.
Okay. Is everyone clear on the proposal? Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, we have a motion, second. Discussion? Public comment? Okay. All in favor of amending the proposal of staff to include a lower tier threshold of $50,000, enabling a carry forward request of at least $1,000? Please raise your hand.
I just had a question.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure that your motion included Chair Zemer's original recommendation about shall.
Okay, and also the correction language in A2. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, a review of a letter that was submitted on behalf of the committee to the Board of Supervisors regarding the concerns that were discussed in our September meeting. At the direction of the committee, I forwarded a letter to Supervisor Bond on the 12th of September, basically outlining the concerns that we had identified about the growth in the salary component of the allocations. The letter indicated that we had concerns about that particular pattern and also suggested that we thought some sort of discussion with the subcommittee of the board might be in order. That matter was considered on the 19th of November as part of a package of materials that the staff brought to the Board of Supervisors. I spoke in response to some questions for a brief period of time. The summary of that particular transaction in my mind would be that the board was not particularly interested in having a subcommittee discussion for logistic concerns, since the timeline wouldn't really allow it to happen before this meeting of this committee. And also, it just didn't seem to have any legs philosophically with the board as well. They did indicate that they wanted to discuss the matter more completely, so they agendized the matter for the December 10th meeting, this last Tuesday, at which the staff brought forward an agenda item for their discussion. I was out of the area and wasn't able to attend the meeting, so I would ask Ms. Rubio Mills to maybe summarize the discussion and conclusion of the board.
Certainly, yes. So we did bring back the item for discussion. So we originally presented the letter that I've posted here today on November 19th. And the board did direct us to come back on the 10th, which we did. So just on Tuesday, the board decided to not take any immediate action in terms of placing caps, but did ask staff to form a working group with the DA, the sheriff, and probation to develop staffing projections and an action plan to address this trend on an ongoing basis. And so we expect results from that working group to come back in April to the board so they can assess that and really take a long-term view of where the fund has been, where it might be going, and how we can deal with this trend long-term going forward.
Help me understand a little bit again, in more detail, the charge of this. Since the working group consists of the people who have the vast majority of the employees that we're addressing, what is the expectation of the board that this group will do?
Well, I think from their perspective, the challenge is that with salary increases, similar as to what you said, that it is overtaking the fund potentially. And so evaluating how that might affect the ability of the county to provide public safety, which was the intention of the original measure. And so how to balance the staffing of county and non-county and the needs of individual organizations. So, and then we'll have staff from the CAO's office as well to be able to evaluate how that works across the board.
So just as an example, and I'm just going to pick the sheriff because he's the majority player in this game, is it your expectation that the sheriff would come forward and say, over the next 3 years, I project the need to be X positions, and given our current MOU and trends that exist in our employment workplace, I expect each of those positions to be allocated with X amount of cost and so on, and therefore my projected cost at 3 fiscal years down the road would be X? Is that the kind of discussion we're going to have?
I assume that would be part of it, but I think more broadly, I think everybody is affected by the dollar amounts available within the fund, and so how can we all work within the needs that have been established so far and the trends that have been established so far. How can we work within those to set reasonable parameters so that everyone is able to share in the funds and make the most of what's there going forward?
Okay. And that report to the board will come after this year's recommendations, or almost concurrent with this year's recommendations. So there would be no capability to implement any action based on that until the next fiscal year, correct?
Yes, that is so. And as your advisory committee functions normally, you can make any adjustments to the application or to your process of evaluation and make those recommendations to the board now. There's nothing barring you from doing that, and that is definitely within your purview as a Citizens Advisory Committee, and they can evaluate those recommendations during their April review of the recommendations. And so if you feel that there's some action that you think we could take now, then you're definitely welcome to take that to the board then. But I don't think that the board with this timeline would be able to make any adjustments probably until the 2021 cycle.
In the board meeting on the 10th, was there any discussion of the equity issue between internal and external awards?
There was not much discussion of that, and I think that they did recognize that that is a concern from your committee, but it did not seem to be a big topic of conversation. I think it was more around how to manage the capping or not capping of salaries.
Okay. Any other questions of staff about?
Oh, thank you. Did they did the supervisors understand that we're going to run out of money? Did they understand that?
Well, let me speak to my own experience. I can't speak to the
I'm asking you as
10th.
the chairman, as the man who presented.
I think the letter was pretty direct, so I don't think you could misinterpret the letter.
Okay.
My comments at the November 19th meeting were very direct as well. I talked about the sensitivity of certain departments, i.e. those county departments that are receiving the majority of the funding. So I think there's an academic understanding. I mean, this is my personal view. I think there's an academic understanding, but the fact of the matter is, I think there's a sense that the committee is starting to go in a direction that makes the Board of Supervisors uncomfortable, because they realize that ultimately it could limit or curtail the allocations that go to the county positions. And I don't think they really are comfortable starting down that road, as much as they might understand that inevitably that's going to have to happen.
We've already started down that road.
I agree, but your question was, do they understand?
Right.
And my answer is they understand academically, but I don't think they have the stomach to address it quite frankly.
Were there any, I understand that they're going to review it, but were there any suggestions or any discussions, although I watched you on television, was there any discussion of how they were going to solve it?
Not directly. One of the supervisors, I'm trying to think, I think it was Supervisor Wilson, if I recall, and don't quote me on this because I may have the wrong supervisor. There was some request from one of the supervisors that he said perhaps the committee could come forward with some options. In my communications to the staff prior to the meeting on the 10th, I did outline, some increasingly severe options that might be considered. I don't know if there was any discussion or consideration of that suggestion at the board meeting on the 10th.
We did not present those options because the committee would need to present those
Okay.
as a committee, and since we were meeting after the
Okay.
meeting.
Fair enough.
However, we could include those with your recommendation letter
Okay.
at the next.
So to answer your question, there was no consideration of any specific options because no options were presented.
What are the, yeah, Ernie, what? No, go ahead. What has to happen for the to go on the ballot to raise the tax from 0.5% to 1%?
It would.
How does that work?
I think I understand, but let me have staff speak to that because they're probably more knowledgeable.
That would require a ballot measure to go on the ballot and be a vote of the people, similar to the Measure O, which extended Measure Z. It would be a 50+1 vote of the majority to increase the tax. And going back to what the actions of this this working group is, that could very well be an outcome, that they say, hey, I think that we've gained support. Let's go to the voters and let's see if we can raise it a quarter cent or a half a cent up and see what happens in that realm. Whether that's what they're going to do, I don't know. But they may also come and say, we will agree at a period of time when we start to meet a threshold to reduce staffing based on attrition, or they may come back with a capping. There's lots of different things that might come out of this working group as recommendations to the board. But it has been left very wide open at this point on that group to come to the board and let them know what they think the best options are in moving forward.
The working group consists only of the sheriff's office, the DA, and is there any representation from the CAO's office on the working group?
Yes, it'll be the CAO's office working with those three departments, and the thought behind that is that those three departments are the largest users of
Right.
the revenues.
Okay, thank you.
But why can't someone from our committee be on that group?
Because that isn't the way it was constituted.
I mean, we understand it, I think. See, as a citizen of Humboldt and as a committee member, I think that their solution is in the back of their minds. They're just going to say, we'll just wait and raise the tax. That's what government does to us. They raise taxes. And so I'm just that's why I brought it up 6 months ago. We're running out of money, and the solution is the supervisors they're going to put it on the ballot, whoever does that, and they're going to say, we have to raise taxes. We've solved the problem.
Well, I love
And maybe
city
that's the
government.
answer. Maybe that's what we have to do.
Richard.
But we're
Mr.
running
Robertson.
out of money.
I have a couple of questions. One is are we going to see projected revenues from the stakeholder meeting as well as projected expenses?
I'm sorry, that we will be presenting within those meetings? Yeah, yes, we can
Okay.
provide that information to you.
And you talked about we could, as a committee, make recommendations to the board as to how to utilize or change the Measure Z process. What's the mechanism for that? Because I think that's what we tried to do last time we met.
So my understanding from the last time we met was the request that was presented in this letter, and so that was delivered to the board. So if you had other recommendations or requests, then those would need to be made formally to the board. I think that we could bring those with the funding recommendations as a supplemental
Okay.
letter or request. But last meeting, the
Yeah.
letter was what was decided on, and so that was what was presented.
Yeah, I
So-
apologize. I meant that was our intent. That obviously isn't what we provided. Thank you.
Ginger?
So I understand that those three segments have the most money, but was any discussion made about bringing in a representative from one of the private contractors, that use the money, like the police departments or DHHS or somebody like that have staffing that we pretty much told them, once you have somebody, you have to apply every year, but we don't expect you just to hire somebody for a year, like the SROs and the juvenile diversion officers. So can they, even though they're not on that work committee, can they come and listen? Is it an open?
It will not be an open meeting. It will be a closed meeting, and politically it gets awkward to who do you invite? Eureka, Arcata, Fortuna? Then suddenly we have all the applicants that are applying, and everybody's got a stake in this game, and we're cognizant of that. The time for the public, for the applicants, for your committee to participate in that process would be in April when we bring these recommendations to your board. And then, further mirroring what Ms. Rubio Mills said, your committee is an advisory committee, so it is well within your realm to say in your committee recommendations to them that you want specific actions to be taken, and that can be presented to the board at that time.
To just a point of discussion, from my understanding of what we've covered here, though, moving into the upcoming fiscal year, change in those salary positions is unrealistic.
That's correct.
So for this upcoming allocation of funds, we're going to have to work within the similar restrictions that we faced last year.
Correct.
So what would you describe the best opportunity to engage the council with a proposal, and how do you recommend that what kind of time frame should we as a committee work on discussing what we want to see?
In March, when your committee is getting together each Thursday of that month to evaluate the applications, that would be your time to develop a proposal to be presented to the board. That will then come to the board in April for the board to let our staff know what recommendations in your letter or what applications they wish to move forward in the budget allocation process. And at the same time that we deliver your recommendations to the board is when we will also deliver the outcomes from this working group. Following that, our staff return and incorporate the board's recommendations into the budget process, and then it comes to the board one more time through the budget process, being the proposed budget coming in early June, budget hearings taking place in mid-June, and then adopted budget taking place at end of June. All of these meetings are an opportunity for your committee and the public to engage the board.
While you're there, Alicia, one quick question. In the November 19th meeting, during the board's discussion and responses to some of my statements and so on, Supervisor Madrone made he alluded to a quote, I think to use his word, about $1 million under expenditure by the sheriff's office, that he was clearly unhappy with the mechanism by which the sheriff kept being allocated these monies, and the monies were never expended as a result of training and recruitment issues and so on. Was there any refraction or discussion of that particular element at the December 10th meeting?
No, I'm not aware of any discussions. And in the 18-19 year, the sheriff gave back less funds to the Measure Z than he had originally anticipated because they did have cost increase this year. But it is a trend of the public safety departments to have significant salary savings at the end of the years because their positions are difficult to recruit for, to retain. And so that does tend to be a process of theirs. However, that being said, if you have, say, 40 FTEs allocated, even though you weren't able to fill all those FTEs this year, doesn't mean next year you can't. So you continue on in your budgeting as if you are going to fill all of your positions. And that's a standard practice across all of our departments. You budget for the full amount, assuming you're going to fill all of those positions, and then what's left at the end of the year gets returned back.
Okay.
He does not get to carry, if he's got $1 million left this year, and this is actually part of the carry forward process, that, salaries are not something carried forward because you already rebudget those funds. You don't need anything in addition. So if you've got $1 million left this year, you don't get an extra $1 million next year to do with it what you wish.
Okay, thank you.
I want to keep going along on questions on running out of money. What if we get to a place 3 or 4 years down the road? If we get to a place 3 or 4 years down the road and we run out of money, there just is no more.
Well, then,
Wait. Where would the money come from to pay the salaries? Does the sheriff and the fire department go back to their personnel and reduce their wages? I don't think the union would allow that. How is that shortfall made up?
there's many different ways.
General fund?
The general fund could be a possibility to backfill that. Reducing other expenditures, more overhead expenditures, office equipment, training, things of that sort can be considered.
The fire department and the police department does that.
Well, the fire department doesn't have staffing associated to their application. They're strictly equipment-based. The outside agencies, Eureka Police Department, Arcata Police, Fortuna, they have to come each year, and if the money runs out, if there's not funding available there, then then that would be a recommendation on your committee's part to consider and for the board to consider on whether or not they approve those funds.
Who is they?
The board of ultimately, the Board of Supervisors has full discretion
Right,
over
right,
these
right,
dollars
right,
and
right.
how they allocate
I
them.
thought maybe you meant the individual, the fire department in Fortuna or police department.
No, fortunately, they don't get to make
Yeah,
those
right, right.
decisions. The board does.
Okay.
So there, I mean, that's a fiscal decision that will become a burden of my staff, of your committee, of the board to determine how we're going to address that if and when that time does come around.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions of staff on this before we continue our discussion at committee level? Thank you. When I spoke to the board on the 19th of November, I made an allusions to the fact that we were hoping for some guidance and direction because this process is obviously about to, start again, and we felt the need to try to address it this year. Quite frankly, I'm disappointed that the board decided to kind of just kick the can down the road. And so, given the fact that they have decided not to address it at this point in time, it's clearly incumbent upon us, if we feel the need, to try to do it internally here and bring it forward, as staff indicated, as a recommendation to the board. So I'm interested in the committee's position. Do you feel, and let me explain why I'm bringing this issue forward. One of the things I had hoped the board would talk about was this internal-external equity issue. In my mind, if the committee and/or the board was to adopt a position whereby the internal salary positions were treated differently than the external ones, I would view that, quite frankly, I'll use strong language, a betrayal of the measure. And in my mind, there has to be an equity to the process so that if we're going to fund 100% of the costs of the internal positions, then we cannot go out to the external agencies and say, we want you to bring 10 or 15 or 20% of your application amount in order to make the thing fly. Apparently that discussion never occurred at the Board of Supervisors, but I'm curious, first of all, and the reason I raise this is we're going to talk about the application in a few minutes. And if in fact we're going to even suggest to the outside applicants that there may be some changes in the way we address those this year, we'd first have to address that equity issue of internal versus external. So what is the committee's thoughts on how we would treat external applicants versus internal carry forward salary positions?
Mr. Chairman, would you explain for us who are slow the difference, what are you referring to, internal and external?
Okay, the county has, I don't know, let's just use the sheriff as an example. Approximately 40 FTEs, full-time equivalent positions, are currently funded under Measure Z.
Right.
And Measure Z funding pays 100% of the cost of that position.
Yes,
Okay.
that's internal.
Yeah, as an example, Fortuna has a school position, help me with the term. School resource officer. And in the current year, we also have funded 100% of the cost of that position. My concern is that were we to start looking at trying to trim the effects of this inflation of the salary, one of the things we might do is either implement an absolute cap. We might say that Measure Z would fund, or we would recommend to the Board of Supervisors, I understand that we're advisory and we're not the decision makers, but we could recommend to the Board of Supervisors that those salaried positions that are carried forward were funded 90% with Z money and 10% with the funding source that the applicant would have to identify. My point is, I do not feel like it would be ethical or fair for us to say, we're going to continue to fund all the internal county positions at 100% of the cost, but demand that the external applicants shoulder some of the burden outside of Z. So a police officer working for Fortuna, we would reimburse, say, at 80 or 90%, with them having to come up with the other 20, and then turn around and say, but we're going to give the sheriff full 100% funding for each and every position. That's what I'm terming the equity
Right,
argument.
Good.
And I'm curious about people's thought about, do they share the chair's position that equity issue is a moral issue, and it's also a practical and pragmatic and political issue that we need to address if we're going to start putting a limitation on the salary component of this operation.
Well, on the internal though, once we said that we're going to pay for these positions, do you think that we have even the power to suggest to reduce the pay?
Absolutely,
You think so?
absolutely. We can make a recommendation at the committee's direction. Whether the Board of Supervisors will support it and enact it may be an entirely different question, but the committee clearly has the operational authority to make a recommendation in line with the committee's determination, and that's a potential. Now, obviously, if we're going to start doing that, some sort of understanding of the realities and the real-world effects of that need to be part of our discussion so we don't propose something that's not doable in the real world.
So, I don't feel personally this committee should tell anybody on the outside to cap. You know, that we'll only pay X amount or X amount, because what we've done in the past is we've given them what we felt, you know, we could give, and then they've come up with other ways to fund the rest of the positions, or they've come up with other ways to have the person work part-time or full-time. I don't think that that's up to us to put a cap on anybody's position on the outside. The inside, I don't know. I suppose that's what the work group is supposed to do. They're supposed to figure out a way to, you know, deal with the staffing, but to put something in an application and say you can ask for staffing, but, well, no matter what you do, we're going to ask for 80%, or we will consider 80%, because I know external agencies do figure it out. You know, either they have them work less hours, or they come up with a little bit of extra money from the city or whatever. That's what they've done in the past. So I don't know if it's up to us on an application process to give them an amount or a percentage. I think that's up to them.
Okay. Nicholas?
I wanted to respond to your question. I do echo your concerns with the burden of funding being placed on the external agencies and looking at the internal agencies as the priority. I see that as a concern worthy of discussion and recommendation by this committee, and I hope we continue it. What that turns into, I don't know. Because as a county, we do have to come together and find something that works, that we can agree on. And I think based on all of our challenges, that's going to be difficult. But I really do hope we continue that conversation. I'm hoping that we can take a percentage look at it, because at that point, we will be dealing with just the income that's coming each year, and not looking at set amounts. I'm hoping that we can define what kind of percentage we can expect to recommend towards the internal positions. One thing I noticed from the last year was the county did pick up funding for several programs through the general fund. I think if we as a committee are able to influence them in this way, I think we need to start to be much tighter on our budgeting, and almost create a 10% contingency or a 5% contingency on the applications that we put out, so that we're not impacting the general fund with our allocations. With our recommendations, as a way of trying to have a more realistic view on how to make change. And that's kind of what I'm hoping to see us move forward to.
Any other thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I totally agree with you that these are moral and pragmatic and political decisions, especially political at the Board of Supervisors level. But I have to disclose, I just recently returned to Humboldt a couple of weeks ago after being out of the county for over 3 months due to a family emergency, so I may be a little uninformed here, but I'm curious as to the status of the county's general fund budget, and if I'm looking at pink elephants to think that perhaps the working group might find if any of their Measure Z positions can be funded in their general fund request, even one position, and if it means they have to cut some services and supplies line items to maybe make that happen, I'm just throwing it out there.
So the intention of the fund initially was to provide a funding source where the general fund was unable to provide, that the general fund was unable to provide previously. And so it was voted into or presented as a solution to that lack of funding. And so if we put the burden back onto the general fund, we could just be recreating the same problem that the measure was initially enacted to address. And so that kind of is the piece, I think, that makes it a bit of a challenge to revert positions back to the general fund. That certainly is a recommendation that your advisory group is welcome to make. Yeah, so that's something that you're welcome to make a recommendation of, but that's sort of the context that sits within.
Any other comments, thoughts?
I don't personally think it's within our purview to reduce salary, so to speak. I think our mandate is to make the best decisions as citizens and representatives within applications. I don't think there's one solution for this problem. I think it's multiple. I always go back to what the original intent was. That's delineated in the measure that we're looking at in our packet. And I think that was the struggle we had last year, is what fits within that and what does not. So when I hear internal versus external, I think the internal is the priority, because that's how I read the intent of the measure, that the county wasn't able to provide those services. That's what the measure was created for. Those positions have now been funded to increase the customer service to the county. I'm more interested in what Nicholas spoke to as to an apportionment. I'm personally more interested in a fixed apportionment that we can look to in the future, that the CAO's office can budget for, so we kind of know what we're dealing with. The big problem right now is we try to initiate some of these changes before we got to this point, so that the supervisors could provide direction to us, as you said. So I think our options right now, before we receive applications, are very limited. And I think we're going to be in the same position we were in earlier this year, where we have applications, we make our process, and then it comes down to reducing specific applications. So in essence, that's what we're talking about doing before we make our determinations, and that's, I think, what we're going to end up doing anyway. So that's a long-winded way of saying I don't have anything specific I would recommend before we begin. I think besides adhering to these 7 points, that what I think, or what I would encourage us all to look at and say, this is what the intent of this measure is, and that's what we should be recommending be funded.
Okay.
I'd like to make one comment with that. And I appreciate you returning to the ordinance, because in coming here, that's the only thing that we've been given direction on. The one thing that concerned me, as we've talked about this internal, external, from my interpretation, what we've defined as internal expenses do not cover the extent of the ordinance. And so there is a written description of how these funds will be spent that's not covered in the guaranteed salary positions. And we need to ensure that those items have the opportunity to be served as well.
Any other discussion? Public comment?
Thank you, Justin McDonald, President of the Chiefs Association. And first, I have to say thanks for doing the hard lifting on this. This is a huge issue, and thanks for trying to tackle it. And I'd echo what you just said, that Mr. Mattson is an internal candidate for funding, and yet he's always playing scraps at the end of the year with getting that funding. Question I have, and I don't know if it's for you guys or maybe for staff, is the Sheriff's Department never seems like they're fully staffed, and you have some general fund money staffing, and you have the Measure Z staffing. We have vacant positions on either side of that coin. Can we reallocate some of those funds, Or are we 100% staffed with those Measure Z positions in the general fund? You know, can that be reallocated? I don't know, but it's food for thought for somebody, maybe. But again, I appreciate your internal, but it sounds like, you know, we have DHHS, roads, airport. There's a lot of internal that seem to come to the table with us from the external to fight for those 4.4 million that's left. So again, thank you for doing this.
I don't have does staff have any answer to Mr. McDonald's question, or?
I imagine it's those types of questions that this work group will be working through. So I assume that is going to be a topic of conversation, but I don't have a specific answer
Okay.
for you on that.
All right.
Ernie Branscombe here. I have spent a good part of my life in a fire department, and I've also spent a good part of my life on county roads. And anytime there's any discussion of saving money, I think county roads is the first to suffer. I think Mr. Madsen will agree with me there. And then fire departments are always squeezed out of their funding. I've seen it so many times that if there's no money available, they take it, well, they can live with the chuck holes, and pretty soon they're taking it away from the fire departments. I don't think the funding, where it goes, has much to do with internal or external. They're going to go after county roads first to take money from that. They're going to go after fire departments second. Then they're going to go after the external funding you're talking about. And there's just not enough money to go around. I think what Humboldt County needs to concern itself with at this point, maybe this is off the subject, but I think they need to develop the economy of Humboldt County. I just came back from Ukiah last week, and they're booming down there. They're building houses. Of course, it's from the fire in Santa Rosa, most likely, that reconstructing in Ukiah. But we need an economy up here, and I mean, that's not within the purview of this committee, but I guess the best thing that we can do is just divvy up what we get to divvy up, and the Board of Supervisors, like you say, they're the ultimate deciders. So we do what they ask us to do and divvy up what money we have. Don't know what other direction we can go. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Ginger?
So this is a closed meeting on the work group, but could we submit questions as committee members or something just to, you know, we wouldn't be there, but is there a way to submit questions or things, consideration for them to look at?
I think that we could bring
Like through,
questions.
like I could give it to Mike because he appointed me or something like that, is that?
I think so. Would you? Yeah, I think we could
That's what
certainly do that.
Okay, any other discussion? Oh, I'm sorry.
Good afternoon. Dr. Stephen Stake from Kamal Medical Center, an entity of the Hoopa Valley Tribe. I just wanted to expound a little bit upon the internal, external, just as providing, or however you're going to look at that internally and externally. I would like you to take into consideration the geographical component to that. So we're considered an external organization, but yet we're providing, you know, those emergency services for the Hoopa Valley Tribe, the Willow Creek Ambulance Base, and runs all along the 299 corridor, 15 over-the-bank rescues last year, and I think around 50 motor vehicle accident responses. And so just as that internal budget grows, then we're one of those external ones that would be competing for the very small slice of that pie. And so I just want you to remember us and take that into consideration as you weigh out the equity of how you're going to decide. Thank you.
Okay, any other public comments?
Good afternoon. My name is Walt Wilson, Fortuna resident. I'm not real sure what I really want to say. This internal versus external conversation to me is nuts. Everybody is paying into this Measure Z fund. Why is it that county employees are in better stead than employees of, say, Arcata? Why are you treating county people better? And I have another question. This committee is left with, I don't know, what, $5 million or something in funds to distribute. Who decides how that upper level gets distributed? I mean, the sheriff is in here for the bulk of the money. Who makes that determination? Why doesn't this board, this committee, deal with the whole package? I'm confused, and I'm not a happy camper.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Good afternoon, Supervisor Madrone. You did get the results of our meeting on Tuesday. Did you get any feedback on what we did decide on Tuesday?
Yes, we did.
Good, because whether or not we deal with it now or not, eventually it becomes a problem, because with increasing costs of internal, eventually there's no discretionary money at some point. Is that a year from now? Is that 3 years from now? You know, Measure Z now is ongoing, right? So eventually we reach that point anyway. So we did take an action, as you know, to say, we've got to figure that out. And what we've done is direct probation, the sheriff, and the DA to come back with a plan and say, so how are we going to deal with that? We're not going to wait till we get up against the wall and there's no discretionary left whatsoever to deal with this. So I think that was a good action to take. And I personally look forward to working with you all to try and figure that out, because waiting till the midnight hour is not the way to go with that, right? So I just wanted to reinforce that. I'm glad you've received that information. So thank you.
Thank you.
Supervisor Madrone? Yes, sir. Thank you for taking your time to come down.
You're welcome. I came a long way. It's like,
Yeah, I know. But thank you for coming today.
you're welcome. Thank you for your work, all of you.
Okay. Laura?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to briefly comment on what, Mr. Wilson, is that your, yeah. I don't want to get into a dialogue, but just want to tell you, one of the reasons I voted for Measure Z and wanted to be on this committee is that I was really strong in wanting to see sheriff's deputies on patrol and DAs to prosecute, and fire districts made whole. In my entire career working as a county employee, I did not think the fire districts were treated very well. Now, when we talk about sheriff's deputies and deputy DAs, those are county employees. So that's, I don't think it's a matter of favoritism. I think it's kind of a matter of priorities, and this is just one voter's perspective.
Okay, anything else? Okay. In that case, we'll move to item number 5, the fiscal year 2021 funding application, and consideration of any changes or modifications we may wish to make that application. Enclosed in your packet is a copy of the application form and the inquiries that we have forwarded to applicants in the past. Is there any interest in making any modifications to that document?
I just have a quick one.
May I just add that the application included in your packet was last year's application, so the dates would be changed. And so the proposed dates as far as release and due dates, we are proposing a release date of January 20th and a due date of February 17th. That would give applicants a full 4 weeks to submit their applications. And that would give your committee 18 days, 2.5 weeks to review. I know you get a lot of information, and that would give you a bit more time this year to review those applications.
Thank you. Laura?
I had a quick comment on the cover letter. We just have to accurately reflect who is vice chair and chair.
Any other discussion? Proposals?
I have a proposal. I would propose creating a lead question stating closely to the tone of, please describe how your application fits into the verbiage of the Measure Z ordinance.
Okay, and where would you like to see that?
I would like to see that as in spot of question 3 or the line item 3. I would like to see it added in there, and the rest of the line items moved from that, moved numerically down.
Okay, so insert a request for a statement of affirmation that the application is consistent with the Measure Z protocol, so to speak?
Correct.
And then renumber the rest of the items to reflect the insertion of that one? Is that my understanding?
That is, yes.
Is that in the form of a motion?
I hope so.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, a motion and a second to insert,
So you're gonna have 9 questions instead of 8.
yes. He's proposing the addition of a new inquiry where we would ask the applicant to describe briefly how their application is consistent with the purpose and intent of Measure Z as forwarded to the voters or something to that.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I think, what is the process that takes? Does that take anything other than just reprinting it?
No,
That's as simple as that, okay, thank you, that's all I want to know.
Are we in discussion?
absolutely.
How is that question different than the attachment question with the proposal narrative and the prior year's results?
I feel that that's different because it puts it front and center in the application as the first part of the description, rather than having it being an attachment that's coming as a later statement.
Any other discussion? Any public comment? Okay, we have a motion and a second to insert a new item 3, which is a request that the applicant identify the alignment of their application with the goals and language of Measure Z as represented on the ballot. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. So we will add a new number 3 and renumber the balance. Any other proposals for modification to the application? Okay. Review of future committee meetings. I believe staff had an item they wanted to bring forward regarding the timing of day of the meetings to reflect the needs of one of the committee members. Do you want to speak to that?
Yes, but we did not have public comment on the changes to the application.
Oh, I'm sorry, my apologies. Would anyone like to make any public comment on the proposal that we made to modify the application? I seeing none. Thank you for the correction. Would you like to speak a little bit? I know you indicated that we had previously made an effort to retime the meeting to 1 o'clock in the afternoon, but that's presented a conflict, apparently a consistent conflict with one of our members, so would the staff like to speak to that?
Yes, Sheriff Hansel is unable to make it if these meetings continue to begin at 1 p.m.
And 2 o'clock is an acceptable time from his perspective.
That's right.
So is the committee interested in revisiting that issue to allow the sheriff to attend, or do you wish to leave the meetings at 1 o'clock?
And Hansel can't attend at 1 ever?
That's right.
The sheriff has communicated that he would be unable to attend were the meetings to be at 1 o'clock.
I'm interested in changing the time. I think the sheriff should be here.
I do too. Let's
Okay,
change it
so
to-
what time would you like it changed to, Mr. Roy?
I make a motion, we change the time to 2 PM, 1400.
Is that a second, Mr. Ames?
Oh, yes, I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion, a second, to reset the time of the meetings to 2 PM in the afternoon. Any discussion? Public comment? Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. So our meeting time will revert to 2 o'clock in the afternoon,
Could I just-
starting with the January meeting.
I apologize. I didn't see an eye or a hand
Okay.
from everyone. Was
All
there an
those in favor of the
abstention?
motion, please raise your hand. Opposed? Abstentions?
Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, so a review of future committee meetings.
We had one other item, and that is a proposal to move the next meeting from January 23rd to January 30th. Oh, I'm sorry, to January 23rd from January 30th.
Okay. The application deadline that is just proposed is the 20th, correct? Okay, so on the 23rd, you will clearly not have collated and reproduced all the applications and so on. So what would be the topic of discussion specifically at the January meeting, I guess is my question. If the applications aren't available, what would you propose the meeting focus on?
The applications will be released on the 20th, and just because of staffing, we won't have everyone available on the 30th, and we will have folks here on the 23rd.
So,
I could, maybe I'm just dense here, but I'm lost.
We are proposing to change the next meeting date from the 30th to the 23rd.
Okay,
Because we will not have staffing here to have a full house.
okay.
If I might jump in to answer your question, typically that day, the schedule has stayed the same, where the applications have gone out, but nothing has come back in yet. In that first January meeting, it's more of a touch base. We give you a mid-year report. We see where the fund is and kind of review the application process in anticipation of getting those applications back. It typically, you don't have those applications back for that January meeting. The first time we all get together after seeing the applications is that first March meeting.
Okay. Is it also fair to assume that at that point in time, you would have a pretty good handle on the actual expenditures for the calendar year at that point, so that we could have an agenda item to talk about, you know, where did we actually, in the real world, end up as opposed to our projections?
I think for a calendar year, we won't have that.
I know, we're talking calendar and fiscal year. I understand the
Yeah.
difference.
I can speak to the budget process. We will have the year-end 18-19 actuals, so we tend to update your committee on how the prior year wound up, and then we will have a mid-year projection on how the 19-20 year is going to end. So it certainly is nowhere near what the actuals will be, but it's staff's best estimate on where we think we might be. And it will also be an initial projection of what the next year's revenues look like and how much funding might be available.
Okay, thank you. While you're there, maybe one more question. In line with our previous discussion, are the current MOU documents with the law enforcement elements of the county of a term that you could accurately project the 1 year and 2 year out costs were we to continue funding the number of FTEs that we currently, in other words, is the sheriff's MOU in a position where they have like a 3-year MOU, and so you know what your costs are going to be in year 2 and year 3, and we could take a look and see how this presumed inflation actually, you know, pans out were we to continue to fund the full number of FTEs?
I believe there is one more full fiscal year, so the 2021 year will be the final year of the current MOU. So Human Resources is just in the process of gearing up for the next round of negotiations. Our staff does remain in contact of how those negotiations are going, which helps us to do our projections. So we will certainly take our best guess so to speak, at what the projections will look like in the future. As you know, it is, of course, an estimate. Things can certainly change. We won't have that ironed out at this funding cycle.
Okay, so the salary costs would clearly be delineated in the MOU. CalPERS notifies agencies in November traditionally, so you would have the retirement component. Workers' compensation, insurance carriers and stuff, you're through a JPA, correct?
Yes.
So does the JPA publish, and are there, I guess my question is, we've talked kind of speculatively about what we think is going to happen with these wage structures, and it seems to me that with a little bit of work, we have the capability to identify it very carefully.
I assure you, Mr. Zemer, that staff are very well versed in making revenue and expenditure estimates, and we take into account all of the mentioned items, and we look at many different aspects, the economy, trends, the things that we see going forward in developing those projections to the best of our abilities.
Okay. I wasn't, just so it's clear, I wasn't questioning your capability. I was just trying to, in my mind, inventory the components to see if the information would be available to let us make a good hard estimate of the cost.
All projections are projections. There will be no, hard, it's an estimate.
Yeah.
So I stand here before you and everybody saying that they will change. I will not hit it on the penny, and I can guarantee that to 150%. But we do a good job, and we do our best jobs, and we take into many different factors into account when preparing those projections.
Okay. So, thank you. The matter before us was changing the meeting from the 30th to the 23rd. Is there any objection to the staff's request?
At 2 p.m.
At 2 p.m., yes. Okay, seeing none, Chair would direct that the meeting date be changed to the 23rd.
May we have public comment?
Thank you for being the advocate for that. Is anyone in the audience liking to comment on the proposed change of date as a public member from the 30th to the 23rd? Seeing none. Just maybe to make this easier for me, as a chair, my understanding was that public comment was taken on quote-unquote substantive matters, that procedural things and things of that nature were not subject to, am I misunderstanding the requirements?
This was on the agenda, and each agendized item requires public comment.
Okay, so even if it's quote-unquote non-substantive, if it's on the agenda, then it gets public comment. Okay, thank you.
That makes it substantive.
Thank you for the clarification. I'll try to be a better steward in the future. Seeing no public comment, the meeting date formally scheduled for the 30th will be on the 23rd. Is there any discussion or wish to review any of the other proposed meeting dates that were forwarded in the action summary for the meeting of the September meeting? So those are all still good for everyone, and they still meet your timelines? Okay. All right. I believe it's time for us to entertain a motion to adjourn.
I have just one more question just for staff. For us to submit questions to our Board of Supervisors to be included in that discussion internally, is there a timeline about that, or is there a time when we should have questions submitted to them?
I believe the first meetings are targeted for the first or second week of January. So if you did have specific questions you'd like us to bring forward, we could establish those now before adjourning, or you could send those to us before that time.
I have a question.
Okay.
I have a question for staff.
Yes.
How soon will the application, with the new wording, be available? Because I've had people asking me for copies of the application. So with the changes now, the application that they were going to have is now obsolete. So where do we go?
Yes. As planned, they will have the application available to them on January 20th. That date will not change, but we don't release it before
That's the
that
first
time.
they'll be able to make out an application is January 20th.
Yes, so we want everybody to be able to access it on the same day, so they have the same time frame to compile their information and get that back.
No cheating and filling it out ahead then. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll second the motion.
You would second the motion to adjourn. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Mr. Mattson, could you wait around a second?